focus to where we were working towards writing our school IPM plan. So our roadmap for today is, well, Ryan already went over my background, but I'll have an obligatory biographical slide. A big focus for my class and my pedagogy is project-based learning. So I think this ties in very well with IPM education. So I'll have a brief overview on that if you're not familiar with it. Um, I'm going to talk about why to teach students about integrated pest management. Looking at the people on the in the audience, I think you all know the answers for this, but I will go through it anyhow, especially since this is being recorded. I'm going to give you some context about our school because, of course, each school is different, and this can make a difference in applicability and modifying what I did for other schools. And then we'll get into the real focus, which is my Rodent IPM course in action. I'll go over the syllabus, my outcomes and successes, and lessons learned by me, and my future plans for the course. All right. So, as Ryan said, I'm a board certified urban and public health entomologist. I worked for a large regional pest control company as a training manager. I think that gives me a very much of a hands-on vocational type approach to my classes. I also have served and continue to do so as an entomology officer in the U.S. Army. Currently, I'm teaching high school biology and environmental science. I have a approach of that I call 80s Alopecia, not monarchs. Rather than focusing upon the charismatic, showy insects in my classes, I tend to focus more upon insects of economic importance, um, likely because of my background, but I also think they just tie very well in with curriculum material. So I teach classes on 80s, not on monarchs. I'm very focused upon project-based learning. And so with that, let's get into, I just want to talk a little bit about how project-based learning is different from traditional units, um, if you're not familiar with this. So a traditional ecology unit, and this is something I just took from Khan Academy, you'd be covering introduction to ecology, population ecology, community ecology, and so on and so forth until you end the unit with a unit test. So that's what a traditional classroom looks like. Project-based learning is different. So when I come to my ecology unit, instead of following the traditional curriculum, this is what I would follow. A project-based learning focuses upon a project, a problem you're trying to solve, and then the material focuses in on that. So I would have a native pollinator garden project, and I've run this a few times. We focus upon what are native pollinators, what are native plants, what pollinators are endangered. You see here we're covering food webs and trophic levels, which is definitely in the standard approach, but it's focused on pollinators, ecosystem services, and then we start getting to some of the differences and also where I think project-based learning focuses in on some of the goals of extension programs. So impact of pesticides on pollinators. I know when I was not a classroom teacher, I was always trying to educate people more about pesticides and their effects upon the environment, their pros and their cons. Um, with project-based learning, this is just a natural part of the curriculum in order to better understand and build a native pollinator garden. Same thing with climate change. Um, Instead of having a unit test, students put together a poster designing a native pollinator friendly garden, and then they do field work actually building that garden. I don't know about you, but I can say that for me, I don't remember any of my tests in biology class in high school. What I do remember was my field work. And can you imagine a class where every single unit involves field work? That's a course where students are going to be remembering what they're learning and they're going to be applying it to what they actually do. And that's part of what we like about project-based learning. So this is really sort of a paradigm shift. So for instance, instead of teaching students about air pollution, you would involve your students in studying your school's air quality. Instead of teaching about water pollution, you involve students in studying local waterways. And instead of teaching about ecology and biodiversity, you involve students in building a garden or your school IPM program. And that's the tie-in for what I taught with Rodent IPM. I believe this is expanding outreach into curriculum integration. So traditional outreach is taught by an expert outside instructor. Oftentimes it's a single class. It may have a limited tie-in to the curriculum because it's taught by somebody else. And they tend to focus upon high interest content. So monarchs rather than the 80s. There's nothing wrong with this. Here's my school's neighbor, the Urban Ecology Center, which is an outreach center. They go into the green spaces behind our school, and they study monarchs and dragonflies. Curriculum integration, which is what I'm talking about here, is taught by the classroom instructor. Multiple classes in the course. So rather than just a single day going out and studying monarchs, you have multiple days throughout the course where you're studying that content. It's integrated into the curriculum and tending towards using insects as model organisms to demonstrate core content. So I go into the same green space the Urban Ecology Center goes into, and here's my school right next door. I go into the same green space, but what I'm looking for is, well, I'm going to not do an 80s project. I'm going to be doing a black-legged tick project very shortly. So we're using the same green space, but we're using it for more high interest content versus more core content. So why teach students about IPM? Increasing personal investment in sanitation and other non-chemical controls because they actually understand their importance. I know working in pest control, that's something I've always been trying to get across to the public. So ideally, students will start advocating for IPM and making behavioral changes that decrease our reliance upon pesticides. You know how student lockers can look. They can be rather disgusting with rotting food and Starbucks drinks from weeks prior that have been just left behind. So if the students are actually involved and they understand, they can make a difference in their school. Also moving future consumers, which is what our students are, from a traditional pesticide-oriented mindset to an IPM mindset, and involving more people than just facilities in IPM should result in an increased use of IPM in schools. So often IPM just is the facilities department and everybody else isn't really involved in it. Involving students and their teachers in it should make a difference. Also, IPM's education is part of some science standards. Anybody who teaches AP environmental science, IPM is a topic that needs to be covered. IPM literacy. These are some of the things that we're looking for when we're teaching IPM in the classroom. This list came from the Northeastern School IPM Working Group in October 2012. It's a little bit older, probably worth revising and taking another look at, but it's still worthwhile things to think about focusing on, which is knowing what a pest means, understanding the ecological role of pests in the natural world, understanding the processes that can lead to pest problems, and then also knowing the different non-chemical controls and when to use chemical controls for pests. Okay, so that's a lot of background work. Now let's get into about our school. So here's a picture of where I work at, Escuela Verde. Um, we are located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We're a small project-based learning high school. So rather than following a traditional curriculum, the project-based learning model that I talked about, that's exclusively what we do. We also have an eco-justice focus. We also have mixed grade level classes, which makes a difference. So when I taught this class, I had 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. This makes for something different than if I only had 11th and 12th graders. So there's different skills that you are developing students throughout the high school career. So if you're going to go apply this to your own school, you need to bear this in mind, that I was teaching both 9th graders and 12th graders and everything in between. Also, my school has only single sections of classes. So I was only teaching 30 students. At my prior school, I was at a traditional school before this. I taught 3 sections of the same class, AP Environmental Science. So in that case, I had 90 students throughout the day. So how you're teaching how you're teaching this and how you might modify it for your own school is going to depend upon how many students you have across the day going through the class. Okay, so that's all the background information. Now let's get into the class itself, because I know this is what you came here for. So I've put together a multi-year course plan for this. Year one, this year, I'm working to develop the rodent IPM section of our IPM plan. Next year, I'm going to be working on either the insect or the weed part. Not sure yet. We have a outdoor area redesign happening, and uh, I'm going to pay attention to see what's going on with that and think about if we should be prioritizing weeds or putting them off. And then the third year, I'm going to do whichever one was missed. So in the next, through the 3-year cycle, we'll have the rodents, insects, and weeds all built into our plan. And then starting the following year, we'll start reviewing the plan and updating it. Reason why I'm doing this in multiple stages is that rather than covering all 3 major pest categories in a year, dividing up the content allows better integration into the next generation science standards. So I can take my time and focus upon rodents and their ecology and not have to rush through them so I can get to insects and get to weeds. This allows it to be more of a traditional science class, which I think is important for integrating into the curriculum. Okay, so let's go over my syllabus. I'm going to show you what we did each day, and then we'll go over what worked and what didn't. And here you have a picture of some of my students in action. We went through and did a building inspection, as I will talk about in a moment. And you can see my kids all have their clipboards out. They are in one of the janitor closets, and they are busy documenting some gaps in the floor and the walls that they'd probably seen many times going into the janitor closet, but had never really considered what it meant or why it was important. So we started off with covering what are commensal rodents and how do we recognize them. Students looked at identification, tracks and signs, major diseases carried by each. Then on the next class day, we covered what you look for in a rodent inspection. And that was in preparation for our third day when I threw the students right into it, as you see in the picture, and had the students actually go through and perform a rodent inspection of our building. What they did after that was write an inspection report on their findings. Now, what I used for this is, and let's see, I can, yeah, I can put this into the chat. I found what I thought was the best resource for my students was the IPM checklist from University of California, San Francisco. here. What I really liked about it was that it seemed very detail orientated for a non-professional to use. And it also had, for each item you were inspecting for around a facility, it had a explanation of why that item was important and what to look for. So I felt like this IPM checklist really stood out for use by the general public. So this is what we went through and we used, and I thought it really worked out well. I only used the sections that were applicable to our building and to rodents. So I did cut it down substantially, but it was still a very effective tool for us. Um, the Next Generation Science Standards tie-in is a science practice of obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So this was the big focus for the first few days. That inspection report allowed them to practice this skill set. Then we shifted gears and we started getting into control. And here you can see one of my students who is proudly displaying her model of a warfarin. Um, very much enjoy being a integrated pest management and entomology educator in the high school because it allows me to have students really appreciate things like pesticides and really engage with it, like you see here. Where else are you going to see a student making a model of warfarin and being proud of it? So on our fifth day, we covered rodent traps. And then we spent a whole day on rodent exclusion. And then we got into rodenticides. So on my first day of rodenticides, and we spent multiple days on this, we covered how does blood clotting work. We also covered the discovery of warfarin. Warfarin was my model for rodenticides. I didn't necessarily have the time to cover all the different rodenticides that I might want to and that are popular out there. So I decided that warfarin is such a basic, classic anticoagulant. A lot of what's used are anticoagulants. So warfarin would be a good model rodenticide to use. And that's exactly what we did. We didn't just use it as a model. We actually built models of warfarin, as you can see there with what Egypt has in their hands. So students drew it out and cut out the models, not only for warfarin, but also for vitamin K and vitamin K epoxide. What we did with these is we used these in studying the biochemistry of how warfarin works. So once students had built out the cardboard models of each of these molecules, then I also had a model of vitamin K epoxide reductase. This is the enzyme that changes, let's see, this moves vitamin K epoxide over to vitamin K, I believe. Um, uh, so what we could see was how uh, and I should have taken another picture of this. What students were able to see was that the active site for the enzyme, the active site which switches vitamin K epoxide back to vitamin K, actually gets blocked by warfarin. That's how warfarin works and how the anticoagulants work. Vitamin K is used in blood clotting, and essentially, it's a complicated process, but essentially, when your blood clots, vitamin K gets reduced to vitamin K epoxide. And then that vitamin K epoxide gets transformed back into vitamin K by this enzyme, vitamin K epoxide reductase. And then the vitamin K is present and can be used again. The site that vitamin K epoxide goes into, warfarin also goes into that, as does other anticoagulants, stopping vitamin K epoxide from going in and being changed back to vitamin K. So as a result, you can no longer clot your blood as effectively. So this is something students using the cardboard model you see here of warfarin, and then also other ones. Students were able to model this on their desk, see how it worked, and then write up a summary of what they had just observed. So this has next generation science standards tie-ins. Um, in the biology classroom, it's expected that we study from molecules to organisms, structures and processes. So this is the biochemistry section. So this taught my students about that, just from the standpoint of rodenticides. Also, the next generation science standards has a science practice of developing and using models. So students, through making these cardboard models, were able to practice that. I think cardboard models also very much help out in, rather than having a molecule be something something abstract, it can instead be something that they can hold onto in their hands and they can manipulate and do things with. I've seen this especially engages students, and it allows them to better access the material and then better understand it. I've used models for teaching biochemistry and genetics quite a bit over the years. There's quite a number of different foam models for DNA and its processes. I'll share a link later on for that. And so that inspired me towards the idea of this cardboard model for warfarin. Okay, so here's another picture of some of my students doing an inspection, and I'm just so thrilled by seeing a student holding up a tin cat, a multi-catch trap, with a look of wonder on his face as he's looking into it. That's just absolutely fantastic. Um, how often do you get a look of wonder on a high school student's face? And here it is with a rodent trap. Just absolutely fantastic. They're going through our school kitchen right now, looking for any signs of rodent activity, looking for any conducive conditions, looking at our traps and seeing what they're like. You can also see one of my students has uh, a infrared camera in his hand that they were using to do inspections with. Found some really cool things with the infrared cameras. Um, Including things like certain pipes in our basement were actually hot and other pipes were cold, which was interesting that students hadn't really considered. So many more discoveries we can make with those outside of just Rodent IPM, which makes them a very cool tool. Thank you to the North Central IPM Center for the funding, which helped us purchase those. So then what we did was we moved into building a food web for mice. I used a resource called the Animal Diversity Web. This is a website which lets you look up a species, see basic information about it, see who it preys upon or what it preys upon, see what its predators are, and so forth. This is a really good website that I have traditionally used for making food webs in the past with my pollinator classes, with my Aedes, my mosquito classes, and now also for this class. I should have taken a picture of some of my students' work for this. Slipped my mind until just today. But basically, my students figured out what the food web was for mice on their own using this website, and then they drew out that food web. So they're, again, rather than just listening to something and being passive, they are being engaged and building it out themselves, figuring it out themselves. I also like incorporating an artwork, drawing into my science classes. So many students say they aren't science people. Some of them say, I'm not a science person, I'm an art person. Well, I don't believe in that. I believe we can all be science people. I believe we can all be art people too. Even if you just draw with stick figures, that's still art and that can still be effective at communicating. Um, so I try to incorporate in art into my science classes whenever possible. And drawing out a food web is a good opportunity for this. My students who are really into art, they draw just some of the most amazing animals on their food web. The ones who aren't, that's okay. They draw something simplistic. They're still engaging with it. That's fine. So yeah, drawing activity. So then what we did next is shifted gears and what we did was looked at primary, secondary, and tertiary poisoning and the food webs. So students have already learned about warfarin. They've already learned about rodenticides. Now, using that food web that they've drawn, they can use that to mark up what's primary, secondary, and tertiary poisoning. They have a connection to their food web because they drew it out, because they chose what animals would be in that food web. I mean, within, of course, what would be realistic. So one student might have had at at one of the higher levels a hawk. Another one might have had an owl. One might have a snake. One might have a bobcat, depending on how they draw out their food web. So they have a personal connection to this food web, and now they're drawing out poisoning within it and identifying what animals would be getting ill from the anticoagulants. So this allowed the students to really connect with this concept of primary, secondary, and tertiary poisoning. Um, Also, oh, what I did not include in this, I also found some primary documents from some humane centers in our state that talked about some hawks that they had brought in that had signs of anticoagulant poisoning. And so the students also got to look at that and to identify the signs of the poisoning in the reports, because the hawks were they had wounds that just wouldn't stop bleeding. They went to take they had bruising. They went to take like a blood sample from the hawk, and the site would not clot. So this was very classic anticoagulant poisoning. So the students got to look at those primary documents from a humane center, and see, yes, here is some evidence that there's anticoagulant poisoning happening up the food chain. This is not just an academic activity. This is a realistic problem. And then I spent a day reviewing everything that we covered. Our next generation science standards tie-ins, ecosystems, interactions, energy, and dynamics. You know, in a basic biology class, you need to cover food webs. And this allows us access to that. So this is where this can be tied into a basic biology type class, is the food web material. Also, scientific practices, developing and using models. That drawing they're making, that's them making a model and then using it for that explanation of primary, secondary, and tertiary poisoning. And then also having to construct an explanation of what are those forms of poisoning based upon that model they put together. And here you can see a bunch of my students in the classroom working on their IPM plan. Some are working more diligently than others, but that's the high school classroom, isn't it? Um, but they were all engaged with it, and many good conversations and much good work happened. So the next day I had somebody from the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection come out, And she gave us an introduction to how to write a school IPM plan. And the next few days, she also left us with a template. The next few days, the students basically, I broke them up into groups according to section and according to the section of the plan, and the groups had to write that section of the plan. And that was basically it. Next generation science standards tie-ins, science practice, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. The IPM's plan is a form of science communication. And so this was a good practice of that, of taking everything they've learned and putting it together and giving some good thought about our school and how it applies to them and our school in that document. Oh, thank you. Um, oh, yes. I always try to make the classes that I want to attend myself. I'm not sure my students always quite agree, though. Um, Outcomes and successes. So rodents were actually surprisingly a high interest organism. Everybody wanted to sign up for my class. It was really shocking. I was expecting, like when I teach about mosquitoes and ticks, kids would be like, "Oh, mosquitoes! I hate mosquitoes." But actually, the students were just really into rodents. Go figure. I mean, high school kids, I guess. Gotta love them. Students actually started looking for rodents and entry points outside of class. A student came up to me outside of class and said, "Hey, I saw a mouse in the warehouse. It climbed up the wall and went in that gigantic hole up near the ceiling." And isn't that what we're looking for? That's one of our major outcomes. And it happened. Students researched and drew food webs and modeled how toxins travel through a food web. I think that's a huge success. I think that is very important. Um, the food webs is an important part of just a basic biology class. And then following toxins, I mean, isn't that part of what, as extension educators, we're trying to get out to students? I think so. And also, students learned about how blood clotting works and the function of anticoagulants. I did connect this to heart disease in humans. So I also think it's important that considering how common heart disease is, that students have a bit of an idea about how the drugs work for that. And students wrote a basic school IPM plan for rodents. That's a huge success that it actually happened. Lessons learned. Um, I wasn't fully happy with how the class came out, to be honest. Um, I was a bit scattered this last quarter when I was going through and building it, and I don't know. I think some of the decisions were not necessarily the best, but that's also how these things work, right? So my biggest lesson learned, and I think this is the most important thing for any of you who are going to be carrying this on, is that writing an IPM plan requires a different skill set than a typical school writing assignment teaches. And my students repeatedly got stuck on style, depth, and voice. I didn't think about this. Um, so unless your school is different and does teach more business type writing, um, students really need some practice with this before they go into the writing the plan. So in the future, what I'm going to do is either devote a class day to just teaching that sort of writing skill, or potentially some scaffolding that will specifically help guide students on how this is different from a persuasive essay, a comparative essay, a descriptive essay, a claim evidence reasoning, or any of the other typical types of writing students do, or even a lab report. It's a different type of writing than even lab reports. And I so didn't consider that. Um, Students didn't have a strong connection to the IPM plan. And that also limited it, limited the class. Um, what I mean is that they didn't really see its importance. I explained its importance, but they didn't quite, they didn't fully get it, if that makes sense. So I think next time I might start the course with creating an IPM committee out of the students and assigning them roles that they're going to be fulfilling throughout the course. I know classes like the Model UN structure do things similar to this. This also ties in with the project-based learning mindset that that we're not just learning a topic, we have a job and we're developing something. So I think that'll make a difference. Our building inspection was not as thorough as I had anticipated. I was a bit disappointed with it. Not fully sure what to do. I have a few ideas. One idea is, if you're familiar with science pedagogy, there's something called the learning cycle, or the 5 Es. And with this, students start with the observations, so the inspection, and then they develop an understanding of what they observed. That may have been a better approach. Perhaps I should have had, as the first or second day of class, actually students doing an inspection. I would need to make sure I was okay with them not getting everything and writing down things that they would then have to go understand. That's definitely an approach. I used a more vocational approach where, hey, this is what you're going to look for. Now let's go do it. With my vocational background, that makes sense. I also, when I've done this in the past, 'cause I've done air quality inspections on my school and water quality inspections, your school is there to study, right? So let's study it. Um, Normally I've had teams. Instead, I just had the entire mass of the class doing the inspection. So I think also I might put together teams. So I'll have like a group of students who are only looking for droppings, and then a group of students who are only looking for rub marks. That could be another way of doing it that I might try out. And then they can be much more focused on what their team is looking for. Then we come back and compile the data together. Um, I end up not having time to present the IPM plan or findings to the administrations or facility staff. In part, this was because I wasn't fully happy with our IPM plan and how it was written. They did write it. Um, I think it's pretty good. It's not as good as I would like, due to what I mentioned earlier about them struggling so much with those writing skills. I need to review it some more, think more about it. Ryan's going to take a look at it, and we can discuss it and see where to go from there. But definitely in the future, I need to make sure that this gets presented to the administration and facility staff. It should not just be a document which is done and then shelved like a test. Um, Cardboard molecules, that was really effective for modeling, but it took too long to make them. And some measurement errors led to problems with demonstrating biochemical interactions. So what I might do in the future would be to look for the source of foam models that I've used in the past is 3D molecular designs. I might see if they have something I can use for this, or I might build the models ahead of time. But I was very happy with how they worked, aside from these challenges. Supplies are necessary to best teach about trapping and exclusion. I had a few supplies, but I didn't get everything. Um, I had underestimated how unfamiliar students would be with sheet metal and expanding foam. So used to dealing with this vocationally. I'd also like to have some model entry points so students can like try out putting sheet metal onto a board and be like, oh, this is how it works. I think also my course had too many topics. I learned from one of my old professors, Ron Coeur at North Carolina State, that a key to a good class is to have fewer topics that you cover in depth. And I've normally lived by that. Something went wrong with this class, and I just had too many things. So I covered ecology, biochemistry, construction practices, exclusion, vocational pest control, trapping and inspection, That was just way too much for the number of days I had. I think instead it should be framed underneath rodent ecology, taught as more of a traditional biology class. And unfortunately, dropping the biochemistry portion. I love pesticides, so it's very hard not to talk about them, but sometimes we must skip what we love. So really, next time I would drop the biochemistry portion. That would give me more time to cover the writing practices, to dig into ecology a little bit more. And I think I can frame, I think the exclusion and the trapping can be framed better from an ecology standpoint rather than a construction and a pest control standpoint. Um, that's how I've done my vector-borne disease classes in the past. And so I think the same thing could happen with this. And regarding the biochemistry, probably just need to have a toxicology class where we cover all the fun pesticides, right? So those are my lessons learned. Hopefully that helps you out. And that's everything I have for you. Happy to take any questions you have. Also, here's my contact information. Feel free to send me an email if you want at some point, or to call me, send me a text message. If you are going to be doing something like this yourself, I'm happy to talk with you. I also do mosquito vector-borne disease classes. I'm going to be starting a tick-borne disease class in, what is it, 2 weeks when our next quarter starts. And I traditionally do a pollinator class, which I think I talked about a couple of years ago for this at Pest Defense.
Thank you,
But
Ted.
yeah, that should do it. Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
That was great. Once again, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself. I'm also going to ask before, while we're going to this Q&A, Nikki, can you put up the post survey again, or the quiz question, post quiz question for that? But does anyone have any questions for Ted as you fill out that quiz question? You can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Ted, this is Dawn. I just absolutely am blown away with the ideas that you presented, and I can only imagine the thrilled faces. What a way to grab kids' attention and keep them engaged beyond the end of the class. They will forever be analyzing their world from the brain of a rodent as well as so well done. That's fantastic. One thing that if you haven't done this already, that might be a fun way, and I'd be totally happy to send you some cameras, is you setting up some webcams. They're actually old game cams are the ones that I've used, and I set them up. And we've had some really, really excited people bring in videos, and sometimes it's just the end of a tale that streaks by, but the level of excitement that they've caught this creature on film around where they live just raises the level of excitement even further. But fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing that. I really dying to hear more about your mosquito class, and anything about vectors is I'd be really interested. Pollinators too. Pollinators are cool, but vectors are very exciting for me that kids can learn this. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I like that idea. Definitely, the more students can get engaged with things and chase things and explore, the more engaged they are. So I love that idea about the webcams. Could even, there's home. There's also putting ones up around school in some key locations. So yeah, definitely a very good idea. Perhaps after I'm done with my tick class, this is going to be my first time doing it. Perhaps after that, I can come back to pest defense and talk about how it went. That would be fun.
Thank you. Any other questions? Or comments? Don't see anything in the chat right now. All right. I don't think we're gonna get any more questions, but this was fantastic. Thank you, Ted. Really appreciate it. We don't have our next webinar scheduled, but it will be in May, and we are going to reach out for speakers probably next week. So based on those topics that I shared at the top of the hour or top of last hour. So we will be contacting people. If you do want to do a presentation yourself, please do contact either myself or Nikki. And also we are going to email everybody that survey that I just told you about for the whole year. We want as much feedback as we can as we go through this North Central IPM Center reporting. With that, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Ted, for that presentation of your work with Rodent IPM and with students. Really appreciate it. And we will have this recording available probably by next week. So thank you all.